Welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, your home for weekly information and inspiration to help you get the graduate job of your dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Graduate Job Podcast with your host, James Curran. The Graduate Job Podcast is your weekly home for all things related to helping you on your journey to find that amazing job. Each week I bring together the best minds in the industry, speaking to leading authors, entrepreneurs, coaches and bloggers who bring decades of experience into a bite-sized weekly 30-minute show. Put simply, this is the show I wish I had a decade ago when I graduated. Today, I discuss how to get a job with a tech startup, speaking to Alastair Paterson, CEO and co-founder of digital security company Digital Shadows. One of the rising stars of London's tech startup scene, Alastair has taken Digital Shadows from his kitchen table to the top of One Canada Square in Canary Wharf, through to now opening up offices over in San Francisco. Now, tech startups from giants like Google to small startups are constantly in the news, and Alastair is well placed to offer brilliant advice on just how you can go about getting a job in this booming tech startup scene. If you're a budding Mark Zuckerberg, Prash Majmuda or Bill Gates, then this episode 9 is for you. Delighted to welcome today Alastair Paterson, CEO and co-founder of innovative tech startup Digital Shadows. Digital Shadows are a cyber-security company based in London and are flying at the moment. Named in the top 25 hottest European early-stage companies, one of the winners of FinTech's Innovation Lab, named last year as one of the top 25 hottest London startups, and FinTech 50's most innovative and disruptive brands. Phew. Alastair, welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast.
Thanks very much.
So before we dive in and talk about all aspects of recruitment into the tech startup scene, why don't you tell us a little bit first about your background and how you started Digital Shadows, and more importantly, what it is that you actually do?
Sure. So my background was originally as a bit of a techie. I did a computer science degree, and then I started out working at Hewlett-Packard doing research. But then I wanted to get into something a bit more practical, and I joined a firm called Detica, which is now part of BAE Systems. And essentially there I was designing large risk and intelligence systems for government. And I ended up running a few different types of projects and ended up moving into pre-sales in the end. So I was traveling around the world running international pre-sales for the company. So I was doing that for quite a while. We got acquired by BAE Systems, which was interesting. I decided in the end I didn't want to work for an enormous defence company. So I set up Digital Shadows in May 2011 with my co-founder James Chappell. And yeah, so what we do at Digital Shadows, it's a cyber security company, and we focus on securing the digital footprints of other companies. So essentially we're looking online at all the information that is out there about a company. We find things that undermines their security or reputation in some way. And I guess the vision behind the company was thinking about how the world was changing, away from a world in which you keep all your data as a company in the middle of your network, build walls around the edge with firewalls and antivirus and so on, and towards today's world where everybody's using social media. There's things like podcasts, of course, as well. Everyone's gone mobile. I expect a lot of people listening to this will be listening to it on some sort of smartphone or mobile device that just didn't exist 5 years ago. Also the cloud and cloud services are really big. And finally, the Internet of Things is coming along. So all of these things mean that companies need to worry about what's going on outside their networks. And so at Digital Shadows, we've got a monitoring system that looks at all of that information. So 26 languages, 80 million sources of data. We find the risks for companies when they're leaking data out, or there's a cyber threat in that data about those companies. So that's us.
Super. And I know one of the key questions we get from listeners is, and a sector that they're interested in, is finding out more about how to get a job in a tech startup. And that's one of the things we're going to cover today. So being a small firm, I guess you're very flexible in terms of how you're able to recruit people. And I know you've recently taken on some new graduates to join the team. Can you take us through the process and steps involved in recruiting them?
Yeah, sure. So I think certainly in the early days of the startup, and ideally as you grow as well, you use your personal network to start with. So you're basically, if you know someone personally and they're good, then that's obviously your first port of call. But after that, if someone else that you know recommends somebody to you, then that's worth a lot, because It simplifies the whole process, and you've got those trust points. So in terms of ways to get into startups, I think getting directly introduced or recommended by someone who's trusted by that startup is probably the number one way of getting in. Outside of that, of course, as you grow as a company, you can't just rely on your own network. So you have to start going out and trying to recruit externally. And there's a bunch of different ways startups can do that. So there's obviously there's events that are specific for startups. So there's things like Silicon Milk Roundabout in London. There's the I think it's Tech City Jobs, and they have a special one on financial services as well. So those are sort of one way. But I guess fundamentally most of our applications come in through our website and our online application process. So what happens there is we'll advertise a role, we get a number of applicants through, we then sift that down in a multi-stage process. So first step is just a sort of sanity check on the application to make sure it's not just full of complete nonsense. Believe me, we get quite a lot of nonsense through that I could tell you about. After that, there's if they're successful through a sort of first sifting, they'd make it to a phone interview. And that would typically be up to half an hour with one of our employees. And that'll be a sort of general culture fit check and sort of, going through the CV. It's not, particularly high pressure, but one of the things we check very carefully is that the applicant knows who we are and what they're applying for, which actually weeds out a lot of people. I think it's strange, you might think, but actually a lot of people just don't seem to even have the first look at the website before they've got the call with the company. Seems quite strange. So then after that, we have usually 2 face-to-face interviews. Ultimately, one of those will be with myself and my co-founder, James, because we still personally interview anyone we're going to hire. And the final step is actually perhaps a little bit unusual. We take them to the pub with the team and basically make sure that they get on well with everyone, and that the rest of the team want to take them on board. Because I think there's one thing being able to do the job. It's another thing being fitting into a team and being part of that team. There's no drinking challenge as such, but it's more of a sort of personality test, and just check that do you actually want to work with us? Do we want to work with you? How's this going to work out in reality? And we try to only hire people that you'd actually want to spend some time with in the pub.
And have you found many people have failed the pub test?
Yeah, you'd be surprised, but yeah, I mean because we check the feedback from the rest of the team afterwards, and it's it is quite tricky. I mean, we had one where there was someone who was just very, very quiet and didn't really engage with the rest of the team at all. We wouldn't want to hire someone who's the opposite end and really crazy. But you sort of need to feel like you're excited about hiring that person. They're going to come in and do a good job, but also make the place a bit brighter and nicer to work in if you can.
In terms of specific skills and attributes that you're looking from graduates, what would they be?
Depends on the role to some extent. So, but there's some sort of generic things we would look for in any applicant. When you're in a startup, it's not like a big corporate environment where you get sat down and told exactly what you're doing on a daily basis, and there's a very strong hierarchy and set of rules and procedures and processes. You've got to be much more self-starting in a startup, fairly obviously. But there aren't enough people around to be able to keep telling you what you should be doing every day. So we need to identify people that are comfortable in that environment, very self-starting, can just pick things up and run with them, and be pointed at a more general area and figure it out to some extent. We've had that in multiple roles, and I think the great thing from the applicant's point of view, and when they've got the job, is that there's huge potential to grow in a startup that you just won't have in a big corporate, because you can very, very quickly take on huge amounts of responsibility, and the company's going to be really happy for you to take that on as best you can and to keep growing and growing inside the organization. So in terms of, I guess the number one thing I'd look for is someone who can deal with that sort of environment. Alongside that, as mentioned, they've got to fit in culturally with the team. So we only try to hire people who are pretty sort of friendly and outgoing, and could be client facing. We'd have no worries about that, whatever their role, even if it's a very technical role. Quite well rounded, because of the nature of the environment.
In a team of 20 people, you can't afford 12 people not getting on.
Yeah, exactly. It's we had one hire like that, which was an intern that didn't work out, and it was apparent pretty quickly that was going to be a problem. And people like that can hide if you've got a multinational with thousands of employees, but not in a small startup.
So what can applicants do to yourself and other startups to make themselves stand out from the crowd?
I think as I say, personal recommendation is always the best route. But aside from that, I think taking the time to really know the company and something about them and make it a very personal application. And I realise that takes a lot more effort on the applicant's behalf. But I think there's no point in applying to 20 jobs, just chucking in a CV and getting 20 rejections and wondering why, when you could pick, maybe 4 or 5 that you really, really want and take a bit longer to personalise the application. I think the best example I've ever seen was we advertised for a sales and marketing internship position a while ago. And we had someone who branded their CV in our company style with our logo on it and various other things. And they also, as part of their application, their covering letter had an assessment of our current marketing approach and how we could do it better. And it was, it's just a one-pager in both cases, and it probably didn't take the guy that long, but it made it what would have been a fairly standard CV rise right to the top in our interview process. So I'd say try to personalise it, and you've got to take a bit of time over that. You can't just do it while you're sat on the beach at Salou or something like that. You've got to really do it properly.
That's true. And how important is social media in particular, such as tools as Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, for you in recruitment? Do you actively use them, or do you expect candidates to be interacting with you with them?
I think it's more the damage you can do on there than the benefits necessarily. It's both, but obviously we'd have a quick search around most applicants to see if there's anything out there that's interesting alongside all the information they provide in the process, and as most employers do. And I think no one's expecting you to be a robot, and we've all got pictures of ourselves in out in the pub or with friends or whatever, and that's all fine. But obviously you want to make sure there's nothing too ridiculous on there that might put off an employer. I think people can engage with us through social media, through Twitter and LinkedIn and things like that, and that is a bonus and shows that they're interested. But I wouldn't say it's sort of the be all and end all for us. I think it's just it's good practice to think when you're posting something online that it probably will be there, potentially forever. And so if there's certain pictures on there you might want to think about removing before you apply, then that could be a good thing. And also just thinking about that you're trying to look fairly professional when you apply. So if you probably don't want your email address to be, we had one from, I think, a Mr. snakey@hotmail.com or something like that.
It's not particularly professional.
No, exactly. You've got to think these things through.
And do you actively then go out and check your clients, the candidates' digital shadows? I mean, if you've got someone's CV coming through, would you run it through your search engine to see if you can find anything about them?
Not as formally as that, actually. We're a company that's advising other companies to be careful what they're exposing online. So, of course, we need to be careful what we expose ourselves, and part of that is anything that our employees post about ourselves that we would be concerned about. But for applicants, it's more of a general sense check that they're not a lunatic more than it is us going through and trying to dig up anything particularly interesting on them.
And what common mistakes would you see from people that they make in the application process?
We've had, so number one thing is not personalising it to the business in any way at all and just trying to chuck in a CV generically. That we pretty much filter that out straight away. And certainly, as I mentioned, if they get to the first call and they still don't really know what we do because they haven't bothered to look at the website, that's a massive red flag. At the same time, I mean, we've had some pretty bad ones through where they've got the name of our company wrong. It's fairly basic. Even surprised. I mean, we've been called Defence Shadows, Digital Works, and Dark Shadows. 3 applications, and one of those was from someone at Oxford. He thought might have known better.
Although, to be fair, they are quite good names. You should maybe think about changing from Digital Shadows to Dark Shadows.
Yeah, that sounds like the evil version of us. So maybe another time.
So yeah, I mean, they're pretty unforgivable if you can't get the name of the company right you're applying to, then you really need to have a good look at yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And what would you say was the hardest question that you ask in the interview process?
It depends on the applicant a bit. I mean, we don't have a stock really hard question, and it depends on the role. That said, the one that trips a lot of people up is we always ask them, usually in the first interview, what do we do at Digital Shadows? And leave it open and see how they describe it. And you'd be surprised, that filters out about half of people who don't seem to know what they're interviewing for or what we do. So strangely, a simple question like that can be the hardest in some respects.
Can you give an insight into your office and work environment? And thinking of a startup, people have visions of beanbags, slides, spending 20% of your time on outside activities. Is it like the Social Network?
Not quite like that at our place. Yeah, I think there's a sort of category of startups that are more the sort of .com kids with the skinny jeans who probably have a bit more of that going on, and we don't have any of the beanbags or any of that. But that said, we work in level 39 in Canary Wharf, which is a sort of special fintech startup space, and we've taken our own space now we've got about 30 desks up on the 42nd floor. With that comes quite a few great facilities we can use. So we actually do have, we've got a table football table. There's an Xbox around the corner. At 4:00 every day, they make cookies, which are pretty nice. And then there's there's a lot of weekly drinks events and things like that. So there's plenty of that going on. But in terms of bizarre office furniture or anything like that, we're not quite in the Google and Facebook category just yet, but open to suggestions if you've got any good ones.
One day we get there. So shifting gears slightly and moving on to internships. So we actually had a tweet into our Twitter channel at Grad Job Podcast from Andy G asking, I'm looking for an internship with a tech startup. What can I do to stand out? What advice would you have for Andy?
Yeah, that's a good question from Andy. I would say you've got to look at the company individually and tailor your application very much to their particular industry and the type of business that they are. So, as I mentioned, for us, you demonstrating some sort of interest in cybersecurity or some knowledge, making it clear that this wasn't just a generic application that you've sent everywhere else would be the sort of number one thing. I think in terms of practical steps, there's a ton of there's tons of startups in London at the moment. It's an exploding scene. If you look online, there's 2 or 3 different startup jobs websites. If you just Google startup jobs London, there's 2 or 3 that we've advertised internships on before. So certainly in terms of finding what's out there to apply for, there's some pretty obvious stuff like that. And a lot of startups will list jobs on their site that will often include internships. And then, having done that, just be aware that each of those jobs, I mean, when we advertise for an internship, we get about 100 applicants we've got to sift through. So,
per internship?
Yeah, per place. So that's probably not as many as some other companies get for some other jobs, because we're still relatively small and unknown. But even with 100, there's some pretty fierce competition there. So you've got to make sure that, if you just chuck in a CV with no personalization at all, and there's 20 people in there that have made a real effort, you're probably not going to make it even through the first hurdle.
You mentioned you were offering internships. I mean, how do you tend to use them? How long do they last? Are they paid? What sort of work can people expect? Yeah,
it's a bit of a range, actually. So back in the early days of the company, the first 6 months, we didn't pay ourselves anything. There was only 3 of us in the firm. Beyond that, we were at minimum wage for a while, just to keep the thing afloat. And so we came across a scheme that we used in our sort of second year. There was an American sort of free internship placements scheme called Arcadia, I think it was. And we had a couple of very bright, very good people through that program who had a sort of allowance through the Arcadia program itself, but we weren't required to pay them because they were effectively just getting work experience with us as part of their trip to the UK. So, and at that stage in our company, we couldn't have afforded to pay for anyone. So it was really great, and they were good people, and we're still in touch. But now we're funded, we're a bit further along, so we absolutely pay for every internship place. We actually pay the sort of London living wage generally, rather than just sort of minimum wage as well. In terms of the roles, it's sort of varied by the stage we're at. So right now we've got a couple of internships advertised, but it's specifically for people who are interested in basically being a cyber intelligence analyst. So we're looking very specifically at courses that involve cybersecurity in some way or intelligence. And so that's sort of not for everyone, and we're only targeting those specific courses. But, aside from that, at other times we've advertised for, sales, for marketing, for sort of general operations and admin. So, and you look at other startups out there, there's, almost any type of role you'd imagine will be represented somewhere in London or elsewhere, I'm sure.
Is your internship recruitment process different to that than it would be for a graduate role?
It's actually pretty similar. So something I didn't mention, when there's a specific job role, for example, something like cyber intelligence analyst, we try to put some sort of task in the interview process. So usually the first or second face-to-face interview, often the second one, we'll set them some sort of homework in the meantime, effectively, where we'll try to come up with a small sort of mini bit of project work that's as close to what we do in the company as possible, so we can actually see what their sort of quality of work is like. So yeah, for this particular internship, we'll have a task as part of the process that wouldn't be necessarily in other jobs. We tried to sort of shortcut it once and just have a sort of one face-to-face and a quick phone interview for one of the internship positions, and that was the one that went pretty badly wrong. So with that in mind, we, even for internships, we're going to take the recruitment pretty seriously.
And do you have a high percentage of interns that you keep on, or that would come back to you after finishing their studies?
Yeah, surprisingly high. I mean, we tend to not, certainly where we are now, we don't take on an intern unless there's going to be potential for a full-time role. So it isn't just, come in and do something, go and make the coffee and book the meeting.
Do the filing.
Yeah, whatever. It's anyone we're taking on, it's with expectation that there is a full-time role. But obviously they've got to show that they're good enough for that. So of the interns we've had in recently, we've actually, I think the last, something like 4 of the last 5 have ended up joining full-time.
It's a good hit rate.
Which is very good. And I doubt we'll keep it quite that high, because we got very lucky with a few pretty exceptional people, and it's hard to get great people, of course.
Just shows the power, though, of getting an internship, and if you do well and 4/5 are guaranteed a job at the end of it, or get a job at the end of it, it shows that it's worth putting the effort in at the beginning. Yeah,
that's right. And I think it allows the company to have a look at you, but it allows you to have a look at the company as well and work out, do you actually want to work there or not? Do you like the people? Do you like the culture and environment? So
definitely,
that's both ways.
Which is just as important.
Yeah, and it looks great on your CV as well. If I was looking at someone who'd done a couple of internships in some sort of similar business versus someone with no experience, then you'd go with the person with the internships.
Definitely. And looking then at the tech sector in London more generally, would you encourage recent graduates to forgo working with larger companies to begin their career with a startup?
Yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one. I went and joined some pretty big companies before I did a startup, and I think I learned quite a bit in the process, because I saw how they operated and got their sort of training and best practice and that sort of thing, and then had to learn the startup stuff after that. But a lot of people do just go straight for startups, and I think that can work really well too. I think it's a great way, in fact, to get a lot more varied experience a lot earlier in your career than most other companies would offer you. I think my first sort of full-time job being at a consultancy was good in that respect as well, because I was getting chucked into lots of different projects and learned a lot of skills in that respect. But I think a startup is even more so like that. I think the things to be aware of, most startups fail and most of them don't pay very well either. And you might get some equity, but the chances are in a lot of cases that might not be worth very much in the end if the startup doesn't end up being one of the next big things. So, but the flip side is what have you lost in that situation where you can always go and get another job, and you'll probably have learned so many great skills there that isn't a problem. And if you're in one of the ones that does go really well, there's probably no more exciting place to be than a company that's taking off and you've been there from the early days. So I think the other thing I would say is it's a lot easier to take those sort of risks early in your career before you've got a house and you settled down and anything else. You don't have so many ties. So if someone's interested in startups, I'd say, go for it now, or at least very early in your career while you still can.
And you mentioned about salary and equity. Would you recommend that people try and negotiate for a piece of equity coming on as a new graduate, or is that going to be pushing the boat out?
Yeah, good question. I think to an extent it depends on the company. So with us, we give everybody equity that joins us full time, even the new graduates. I think it's a sort of important part of our culture that everybody is invested in the ultimate success of the company. I think in some cases, for whatever reason, companies don't do that, and that's the policy, and you probably won't be able to negotiate it. So, but I think it's always worth at least bringing it up and having the conversation and seeing where that goes, because the chances are they're not going to be paying you as much as you could earn working somewhere else, and equity is a good way for them to make it up to you without having to hand out a lot of cash that they don't have.
It's definitely worth a try, and if you don't ask, you don't get.
That's it.
So you mentioned about the startup scene in London booming. How's it looking around the rest of the country? Because I know a lot of the media coverage does tend to be quite London-centric with Silicon Roundabout. Yeah,
I think I'm probably a little bit guilty of that even on this podcast, because we're so London-centric ourselves. That said, we've got a couple of developers who work off-site, one in Southampton, one in Cambridge. And London is not the only startup scene in the UK. There's plenty going on. I know, recently in Bristol there was a whole bunch of startups that were being touted around, and some really good ones out there. From a security point of view, there's a whole cluster actually sounds a bit strange, but out in Malvern, out in the southwest, is where there's a lot of great cyber startups. But then, of course, all the other big cities now have got a bit of a scene going on. I know Birmingham, Manchester, Edinburgh, and a number of others, there are startup scenes that are thriving. But I think in terms of the number and the volume, of course, the attention is going to be on London, because it is a multiple of these other places. And the other good thing with we're a business to business company. We sell to banks and other institutions. Most of them are headquartered in London, or at least their European operations are headquartered in London. And you just don't get that in many of the other cities. So London's great for startups, because there's so much of a scene around. There's also access to finance, because most of the investment firms are here. And finally, the client base. If you are selling to other companies, there's nowhere better to be.
Just a shame it's so expensive.
Yeah, well, that is absolutely true. It's transport costs and accommodation and office space are all big challenges for startups. That said, with a single day's travel pass, you can get around to 10 clients in a day potentially, if you do it right. That's a bit harder to do anywhere else.
That's very true. So, Alastair, time is unfortunately running away with us, but before we finish, let's ask a quick series of rapid-fire questions. So, number one, which book would you recommend our listeners read and why?
Sure. So I think with startups, one of the best ones I've read is The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And it's interesting from a number of points of view, but he really does a great job of looking at the journeys that startups go on and the things that matter in them. So if you're interested in the scene, that's really good. It focuses very much on sort of business to consumer, so .com startups. And the equivalent for business is called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany by a guy called Steve Blank, which I'd also recommend.
Super. And which internet resource would you point our listeners to?
Oh, that's quite tough. There's a lot I use, but I really like a guy called Paul Graham, who's based in the US. He's set up and run the Y Combinator accelerator program for startups. He has a website, I think it's paulgraham.com, where he has a collection of his essays and thoughts about startups that I think are particularly excellent. So I'd recommend that.
That's a new one for me, so I'll have to check that one out later. And all these links and books will be referenced in the show notes, so don't worry about frantically scribbling them down. And finally, what tip would you recommend that our listeners can implement today to help on their job hunt?
I think, a bit of a constant theme through what I've said, but take the time to personalise your applications to companies. Make it clear that you've read about the industry and about the company, and then you'll stand out ahead of the next guy. Good luck with it.
Alastair, thank you very much for joining the Graduate Job Podcast today.
Thank you.
My thanks again there to Alastair Paterson for all of his insights and advice. In terms of key things that stuck with me, if you didn't pick this up, you really weren't listening, is a need for personalisation. Alastair must have mentioned it 3 or 4 times. It's a competitive market out there, and sending bog standard generic applications just doesn't cut it. As he said, there is no point sending out the same application to 20 companies. Pick 4 or 5 and really put the effort in. He gave the example of receiving 100 applications for one internship place, where 20 people personalise them specifically to his company. And that's what you really need to be doing with each application. Make sure you're in that 20% that can be bothered. Otherwise, get used to not hearing back in your applications. The second point for me is such a basic one that so many people fall down on. Being able to answer the question, what do we do? Now, this just isn't the case with niche tech companies. I've seen it with people applying to multinationals in consulting, banking, accounting, you name it. People consistently fall down because they lack a basic understanding of what the company actually does. And you need more than a high-level overview from the website. You need to speak to people who work in the industry or the company or a competitor so you can answer this with ease. Because if you can't, you won't be going through to the second round. Finally, I love Alastair's point about joining a startup when you're young. As you get older, your opportunities diminish as you get more responsibility. And before you know it, you'll soon find yourself shopping at IKEA at the weekend. As he said, you'll get amazing experience working at a startup in whichever industry. It might not be the next Facebook, but your skills and the things you will learn will stick with you throughout your career. And you've got the rest of your life to get a boring job. Right. Episode 9 done and dusted. You can find a full transcript of everything we've talked about and all the links at www.graduatejobpodcast.com/techstartup. Please do get in touch with us on Twitter at GradJobPodcast. And also, if you've enjoyed the show, please leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. We'll love you forever, and it helps other people to find the show. Join us next week when we speak to Liz McGuire and cover the topic of how to create an amazing CV. I hope you enjoyed the episode today, but more importantly, I hope you use it and apply it. See you next week.